Hi there, folks, and thanks for joining us on this hopefully a really cool webinar on getting started with a Citrix certified career. When Train Signal asked me to do this, I was really excited, and the reason for that is I came through the ranks as a Citrix certified engineer administrator. I started off at the very lowest bottom of where you can start off in a technical career. So I'm hoping to give you a little bit of insight about how I did it, what I did right, some of the lessons learned, and why I chose Citrix as a launching pad for my career. And hopefully we'll end this with a lot of your cool questions, and I'll be able to give you some good advice. So let's go ahead and get started. So by way of introductions, I'm just going to pull up a kind of a profile, if I should say, about me, about what I've done, how long I've been doing this. Definitely a huge believer in certification. I carry a lot of them. I started my career with a lot of them. We'll highlight a little bit, the importance of certification. But I've been doing this for a while. I've been doing this for about 16 years, corporate IT experience. I've done it all, right? Now, the thing with me is every time I accomplished something, I needed another task, something else to challenge me so I can keep moving forward. And what I found is, after certifications, I needed to do something that challenged me more, and that's where I found writing and teaching and training, and that's how I got into all of that. But it wasn't always easy. I graduated with a marketing degree, so I never thought I'd work in technology ever. Um, it actually happened on accident. I was always good with computers. I've owned a computer for a very long time, since the Atari and then the Commodore. I've always touched the computer in one way or another. But the way I got my break, to be honest with you, is I was reading an MCSE book at a coffee shop in 1998 that happened to be my dad's coffee shop. And one guy comes up to me and says, "Oh, you're studying for MCSE?" I'm like, "Yeah." And it was Networking Essentials back then, right? So it was the very first book that I was ever touch. And he's like, "You want a job?" I'm like, "Are you sure? I don't really know much." He gave me a break. Actually, he gave me a job. I started with that, and it was contract work, so I'd go for 3 months, 4 months. But then after that, I got my MCSE, and my path, what I thought was going to do was go through Cisco. So I started taking my Cisco tests and certifications, went through the CCNA, and that's where I stopped and found Citrix. And we'll go through what I did and how I found it in a little bit here. But I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of what I've done and how I've remained active. Now, the thing that I want to highlight here is that it's not easy, right? So all of the things that you see on the screen that I've done, these things take time. Everybody can do them. It's just how much time you're willing to dedicate to accomplish this. How much of your personal time are you willing to give up? I'll tell you that there's been times when I was writing books, especially, and in the beginning it was really cool to write a book, right? You're writing a book, you're going to get published. I would be for 4 months, I wouldn't go out. I mean, literally, I would go to work, come back from work, and my afternoon until 10, 11 o'clock would be spent writing books or writing my chapters. So it was really difficult. So as you're seeing all this, and I know from the outside, this is like kind of, for some it's impressive. For me, sometimes when I look back and I'm like, wow, I actually did all this, but you give up a lot in order to do this. But it's also important, and we'll talk about it in a second. So a little bit about Citrix. So if you pull up the company profile on Citrix, you'll find that it was founded in 1989 by a gentleman called Ed Iacobucci. He's no longer with the company today, but he's one of the founders. And this was, when this was founded, this was back when Citrix was still trying to build a product based on OS Warp, I think, back then. And then, it became Windows and WinFrame, and took that path. Today, Citrix has about 6,000 employees. They exist in about 260,000 organizations worldwide. Their 2011 revenue was about 2.21 billion in sales. So this is a software company. Again, the numbers when you're looking at a software company versus when you're looking at a hardware company like a Cisco or an HP, their numbers will be significantly larger just because they're selling hardware. That doesn't mean that their margins are higher sometimes, but just so to put things in perspective a little bit. Now, when you're trying to figure out the vision for Citrix, Citrix has really come a long way. Citrix started off, again, as I was saying, as a single product company. When you say Citrix, to this day, people think XenApp, they think presentation server, they think MetaFrame, they think WinFrame. It's been a single product company for such a long time that it kind of framed itself into being that single product company. But Citrix today is so much more than just a single product, right? So you've got XenApp and XenDesktop and NetScaler and a whole slew of solutions that expand the company um, very much so. So if we were to summarize the Citrix vision, it would be to transform how businesses and people work so that you have a good balance between your work life, your work styles, and your lifestyles. I'm not going to read the entire vision for you, but this is kind of a copy and paste of what Citrix, how Citrix views itself in the industry. So the Citrix certification program. Now, I've gone through this program, except when I took my certifications, the program was a little different. So at the lower end here, the Citrix Certified Administrator, definitely taken that down here, and there was no CCAA at the time. The CCEA was a it was a CCEA instead of a CCEE, which was a Citrix Certified Enterprise Administrator. And this was the highest level certification that you can attain with Citrix at the time. So the CCA, Citrix Certified Administrator, this is kind of the entry-level certification. You'll find this certification has different tracks, and we'll show you in a second. The Citrix Certified Advanced Administrator, this one has a single track. This is usually for Citrix XenApp to show advanced skills. And then you start getting into the higher categories here. These are the really advanced certifications. This is where you're really going to shine. The prerequisites and the requirements are going to be more. And these are some of the ones that you want to be shooting for, because they will definitely stand out on your resume. So the Citrix Certified Enterprise Engineer and the Citrix Certified Integration Architect. So some of the certification tracks, and I tried to summarize those. Citrix has a lot of products, and there's always newer certifications that are coming out every day and newer tracks. But if we were to summarize essentially what tracks they had, it would be application virtualization with XenApp, with EdgeSite, with Password Manager. You have desktop virtualization with XenDesktop and VDI in a box. You have server virtualization with XenServer and provisioning services. You have application networking with NetScaler. This is a very powerful product right here. A lot of us that are familiar with Citrix technologies look at the NetScaler strictly from a reverse proxy perspective, like an access gateway. The NetScaler is significantly more than that. It's very, very advanced from a load balancer, a global server load balancer, an application firewall. It has a lot of advantages. The branch repeater, that's a product that used to be called WANscaler. That's for WAN optimization. That's probably one of the only products that on the market that can actually optimize the HDX and the ICA protocol, simply because the HDX and the ICA protocol are encrypted and compressed, so it's very hard for third-party WAN accelerators to be able to accelerate those. So this is, in a nutshell, the certification tracks that Citrix offers. If we look at the CCA, the Citrix Certified Administrator, and the Citrix Certified Advanced Administrator, you'll notice that from a desktop virtualization perspective, it's covered pretty nicely, right? So you have a CCA for XenDesktop, you have a CCA for XenApp, then you have a CCAA, the advanced one, for XenApp only. That's the only one available as of this recording. You also have, from a data center and cloud perspective, a CCA for XenServer, a CCA for NetScaler, a CCA for Access Gateway Enterprise Edition. Now, the Access Gateway Enterprise Edition, this is where the exam is testing you strictly on the Access Gateway functionality of the NetScaler. Typically, the Access Gateway Enterprise Edition comes essentially almost like a virtual machine that exists on the NetScaler. So instead of testing you on the entire product line or the entire feature set of the NetScaler, you are being quizzed here strictly on the Access Gateway functionality. So for those of us that are deploying an Access Gateway in the form of a NetScaler to serve as XenDesktop or XenApp, then you don't need to know all of the other things that the NetScaler can do. Attaining the CCA is really easy. You simply have to pass one exam in order to become Citrix Certified Administrator on one of these tracks. So if you're doing it on XenDesktop, you become on XenDesktop. On XenApp, you become on XenApp. The CCAA certification, you must pass the CCA for XenApp, and then you have to pass the corresponding test for the CCAA exam for XenApp. Now, I tried to shy away from listing exam numbers here because, again, depending on when you're going to be viewing this, today it might be an A19 or an A17. It might change, and depending on which version of XenApp you're taking the test against, because there's still a couple of versions that are active, the test number might be different, and the same thing for XenServer and XenDesktop. So just check with Citrix for the right test here. Now, the Citrix Certified Enterprise Administrator or Engineer, in order to do that, you have to attain CCA on each of the following. So you need to be a Citrix Certified Administrator on Zen App, on Zen Desktop, and on Zen Server. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why it's important and why we're adding, the layer of Zen Server, why the virtualization layer is important, especially when you're looking at becoming an enterprise engineer. You also have to attain the CCAA for the following, which is Zen App at this point. That's the only one that's available. And you obviously have to pass the engineering exam, which is the A25 Engineering, a Citrix virtualization solution. The CCIA, this is when you become cream of the crop, the elite, best of the best, right? So you're attaining, you need, a prerequisite for that is to have the Citrix Certified Enterprise Engineer certification with all of its requirements. You need to gain architect level experience. Now, what does that mean? They throw that in there. It's kind of a loose term, but what does it mean to gain architect level experience? So the idea behind this certification is whoever is going to take it has to have actual real world knowledge architecting large scale or complex Citrix solutions or Citrix virtualized solutions. The only way you attain that architect level is by doing a lot of this work. Now, depending on the role, depending on the job, depending on the career path that you're in, if your company is going to be heavily centric around Citrix and you're deploying a lot of these Citrix technologies, then you're going to gain that architect level experience as you're bringing all of these Citrix solutions together. So if you're deploying Zen Server and you're deploying NetScaler and you're deploying the branch repeater and Zen App and Zen Desktop, and you're putting together these solutions that Citrix is presenting, then you must have done some design work ahead of time to get them all to talk to each other to integrate. That's where you're starting to gain that architect level experience of how you do that. Now, if you're working for a value-added reseller, whether it's a Citrix partner or maybe just a services partner for Citrix, then part of your duties is either you're going to be exposed to architects that are developing and designing these environments, or you're going to get an opportunity to start architecting maybe at a smaller level and then just grow into the role from that perspective. So the architect level is just going to come from the things that you're doing on a repetitive basis. You obviously have to pass the architect exam as well. That's the A16 Architecting a Citrix Virtualization Solution. And the reason the real-world experience is important is because this particular exam is going to be focused, is going to be quizzing you heavily on real-world situations and how to put them together. Complete the CCIA program documentation. That's essentially accepting the program agreement and completing an online profile questionnaire for Citrix. So when you get the Citrix Certified Integration Architect, you put that on your resume and you're applying for a job from that perspective. People know that, hey, this guy, he knows what he's talking about. So you have to know virtual. And the reason I say you have to know virtual is because if you look at a traditional stack, and I'm sure most of you know this, I just wanted to highlight it because it's important. In the past, there was fewer things for us to learn and become masterful at, right? Very few things that we had to understand and know it inside out. We have to know the hardware, what kind of hardware we're installing on. But then you install an operating system, and typically after you install the operating system, if you're in a Citrix Zen App world, then the Zen App application came immediately after that. So from my perspective as an engineer, as an architect, I needed to know Citrix inside out, and the operating system became a given. I had to know Windows, I had to know Active Directory and group policy and all of those, because there's no way I'm going to install Citrix and fine-tune it, and the layer that's underneath it, I don't know that very well. So when I would put my resume together, I wouldn't even mention Microsoft to any extent, because if I'm a Citrix engineer, it's almost a given that I know the Microsoft environment pretty well. Now, I'm not talking about knowing the Microsoft environment from Active Directory replication, all that stuff, but I know group policies very well. I know advanced configurations. I know DHCP. There's a lot of things that come together that I'm expected to know if I'm going to be configuring a Zen App environment properly. Now, what happened today? Now, we've introduced another layer. So this is something that's very important because I see it at customers every day as a consultant and I'm visiting customers. I see Citrix administrators that are excellent Citrix administrators. They know the application inside out. They know all the tweaks. They know the operating system very well. They will go into the registry. They will optimize it so that thing is running perfectly. But with one caveat, right? Well, now there's a hypervisor They haven't accounted for the hypervisor. Typically, they're used to operating system hardware. As a result, all of the tweaks that they've done, they're not seeing that advantage or that performance that they're expecting. And I've seen a lot of them go back to physical hardware. So instead of advancing their knowledge and understanding that, hey, there's a new layer now here, they're simply saying, well, virtualization is no good for XenApp. We're just going to go back to physical hardware. Now, whether your hypervisor of choice is going to be vSphere, whether it's going to be Hyper-V, or whether it's Xen server, regardless, you have to have a certain level of understanding of the hypervisor as well. So you have to know the hypervisor, how to configure it, how to fine-tune it, how to tweak it, so that the application that you're installing on the operating system inside of this virtual machine, that is taking advantage and giving you the best performance possible. Today, I can very easily tell you that a XenApp or a Xen desktop environment on a virtualized infrastructure will run just as good as on a physical infrastructure. So if you're not getting that level of performance, or if you're trying to just become a specialist around Citrix technologies, I'm advising you that you have to be a little more complete when you're looking at pursuing a Citrix certified career, because Citrix sits at a higher level. There's two levels at least between Citrix applications and the actual bare metal hardware that you have to master in order to deliver these solutions appropriately with the right service level agreements and performance that your customers are expecting. So whether it's Xen server, vSphere, or Hyper-V, both of them or all three of them are very good hypervisors. You have to know how to configure those and tweak them beyond the basic installations, because, and that's another thing, when you're starting to get into advanced applications like Citrix, you have to know what hypervisor configurations you have to modify, and there's a few of them that are not defaults that you have to tweak in order to get those applications to work optimally. So getting started. Well, how do we get started? I get asked this question so many times. Well, how did you do it? How did you get started? What did you do? Well, like I was telling you before, I got started, it almost happened on accident. I got a break, but that break didn't last very long. So, this gentleman, this organization that I started with, gave me 2 jobs that were about 3 months each. And they kind of gave me a taste of what a career in IT could be back in 1998. So, I went to a company and I was deploying Windows NT at that point. And I was deploying it using, I think, the first version of Ghost. So I went there, 3 months. I deployed, I think, 60 servers using Windows NT, and that was it. And then I went to another company for another 3 months that had Novell and Windows NT workstations, and that was a huge mess. Then after that, I kind of, he didn't have anything to give me, and I was back to, well, what am I going to do now? Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you is sometimes it could be frustrating, sometimes it could be challenging. And I used to send my resume to a lot of people. They would look at it and they would just brush me off. No, you don't have the right experience. No, you don't have any experience. No, you don't have any experience. And I'm like, well, how am I going to get experience if you're not going to give me a break? So what I did is I remained involved, and I kept trying. And one day I got another short-term contract, a very short-term contract. It was for 3 weeks, I think. I went into this company, and that's where I was introduced to Citrix for the very first time. I hadn't heard of it, didn't know about it, nothing. I go in there, and they have all these Weiss terminals, and I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. This is a really thin computer, and I'm looking at this, and I'm like, where's the hard drive? And I just started asking questions, and I started, I became friends with the Citrix administrator. Started to understand how that technology was. And like, what? I think I found my niche. There's not a lot of administrators that I'm coming across that are Citrix specific, so I'm going to pursue that. So I started studying for the CCA as a way of distinguishing myself on my resume. I needed a way for when my resume hit that hiring manager, he saw something on it that was different than the other person, because today most IT folks, if you're in this realm, we're all going to have the same certifications. We're all doing the same thing. I am advising you to do the same thing on this webinar. So what you need to do is find a way, put a keyword, do something on that resume so that it pops out, so that it just gives you that chance to get through the door and get in front of the hiring manager to essentially plead your case. Citrix was mine. So what I did is, after I passed the CCA, I put Citrix on my resume, albeit I didn't have much experience, but all of a sudden the type of callbacks that I was getting were better. They were more serious, and I found a job as a junior Citrix administrator at the time, where I was able to learn this better and expand and continue on from there. I did that. Then, when VMware came along, I started playing with VMware. I saw vMotion. I fell in love with that, and it just started happening. Once you get in, once you're on the right track, things will just start to fall into place. So getting started, it's not going to be easy. And believe me, regardless of where you are in the world, some of you are going to be like, well, you're in the US, you have more options. There's a lot of people in the US and different areas in the US that are have the same types of challenges that people outside of the US have. So I will say to you, try to find a way to distinguish yourself. And in today's world, you're going to have to find a way on your resume to show that you know more than just Citrix, more than just Microsoft. Maybe the culmination of the things that you're going to put is going to strike somebody's interest and bring you in for an interview. Now, step one. This is if we're going to break it down. Commit to learning. Many, many years later that I understood that this was a really good foundation for me to know token ring and all of that, because at the end of the day, they all come together. So committing to learn is extremely important, and learning never ends. That's the other thing that I'll tell you. We kind of think that we're going to go through and once we graduate from college, we're done. Well, in this career, in the technology career, more than any other career, in my opinion, you never stop learning, because technology is moving so fast, because there's a newer version with newer features. Because something is changing all the time, and there's so much competition, and there's a younger generation that is always going to be sharper, is always going to be smarter. Us, the older generation, as you start to get older, and we're in different paths obviously in life, but there's always going to be someone younger, right? So those are competition too, and they're going to be able to understand things and learn things quicker. So you find yourself constantly needing to learn, which leads me into step two. If you have to learn a lot, if you have to learn constantly, then what becomes important is the quality of training, the quality of the person that's giving you the training. Because you can spend 3 hours trying to learn something, or you can spend 20 hours trying to learn something because you're trying to find out, well, how do I do this again? Well, this wasn't clear, and you're trying to understand it. One of the things that we do really well at Train Signal, I'm going to plug Train Signal here. This is kind of a shameless plug that I'm going to do. One of the things that we do really well is we try to simplify it, get straight to the point, and make sure we relay the message as quickly as possible, as simply as possible, and as complete as possible. So if any of you have followed my work, whether it's the VMware stuff that I did with David Davis or the Citrix stuff, I don't focus a lot on presentations. I try to go through them as quickly as possible and get to the, well, here's how we do things. We get very detailed oriented, and I try to explain it the way I would do it, in a very non-rehearsed way. So I don't, write down any of my lectures, nothing. I will just put up the screen and I'll just talking to you as if you were sitting next to me. And that's been a very big success in my life. I've gotten a lot of good feedback on it. So whether it's following Train Signal, me, or any of the other instructors, or getting training from somewhere else, make sure you're getting quality training, because you're going to need training on different topics, different subjects, and you don't have the time to sit there and go figure out if this trainer is going to be able to relay the message for you or not. So do your due diligence ahead of time so that you can go through some of these tracks quicker. Step 3, relevant experience. So training and learning is great, but until you actually start doing things, you never know what you're going to come across. So I can show you things on the screen and everything is working fine for me, and sometimes it takes me 2 to 3 days for me to build a lab in order for me to deliver what you see as seamless on your screen. And sometimes what goes okay for me, you might have challenges with it because you have different types of hardware. There's a lot of moving parts here. All of that is overshadowed by that relevant experience, and the relevant experience comes from your repetitive your repetitiveness when you're doing certain tasks, when you're doing certain solutions. So if you've decided, you know what, I'm going to, go through my technology, I'm going to build my technical career based on, let's say, on, virtualization, whether it's server virtualization or desktop virtualization or application virtualization. I'm going to be an expert at server virtualization on VMware and Hyper-V because I think that's where the future is going, or private cloud. Try to channel yourself to get the experience, to get the work in those areas, because that's what's going to overshadow what you've been learning, instead of kind of going in another direction. And I'm going to come back to relevant experience in a second. 4 is staying in demand. Now, how do we stay in demand? Great question. And the only way to stay in demand in the technology field is to stay up to date. So again, this goes back to step 1 and step 2, which is learning and training. If you don't stay in demand with the fast-moving pace of technology today, you're going to find that in a year, and that's how quickly it moves. In a year, your skill set has diminished. Like and I'll give you examples. If you look at XenApp 6.5 and you look at XenApp 5 or XenApp 6, there's a lot of feature difference. And as we speak today, there's a technical preview, for instance, of a project at Citrix called Excalibur. Project Excalibur is the convergence of XenApp and XenDesktop. So they're going to become one product. So just imagine if 6 months from now or a year from now, you're not staying up to date. You're not staying in demand. You don't know about Excalibur. You haven't touched Excalibur. You haven't trained on Excalibur, nothing. Well, as long as you're working at the company that you're working at, great. But if you want to make a change, it becomes challenging, right? And even in the same company, you have to be able to build yourself, protect yourself against, well, how do you upgrade this? So you have to be able to stay in demand by understanding the changes, keeping up with the changes around the technologies that directly affect you, and staying one step ahead of the game. So getting experience. So how are we going to get experience? The first one, I know some of the stuff that I'm going to put on the screen now, you're probably going to say, well, I know this, or I've tried this. But it really does work. And some of this I've done myself, like the volunteer work. My path wasn't through volunteer work. I, started off by someone giving me a shot that was, short-lived, but I was able to capitalize on it. But in your case, it might be volunteer work that can open up doors, right? So if you're volunteering, I don't know, for your church or for your community center or for your village, sometimes if you're going in and you're actually doing the work, maybe they can recommend you to someone, or maybe someone there has a connection with someone else that you just met. Hey, I'm doing this for free. If you've heard of something, or if you hear of anything, keep me in mind. You'll be surprised how how nice people will be when you're volunteering your time, you're volunteering your work. A lot of people will go out of their way to help you. So definitely do it if you get an opportunity. If you're not doing anything, volunteer work also leads to what? It leads to experience. Yes, you're not getting paid for it, but you're gaining relevant experience here. Internships. So a lot of companies, a lot of organizations will do internships, and internships come in one of 2 flavors. You have the paid internship, and you have the internship where you're working at a company just for the relevant experience, just so you essentially get a break without them having to invest in you. And if things work out, a lot of times they'll end up hiring you in that company. Or if it's a large enough company like a Kraft Foods, for example, or a Bank of America, you're able to put that on your resume. That will automatically, it's one of those keywords that's going to stand out. So internships, again, ask for internships with companies that are in your area that you like to work for, because a lot of times, and my company has done this, Sigma Solutions has done this. What we would do is we'll hire an intern. We'll pay them, very little for the most part. But what we're doing with that person is we are building them up, right? So we are making sure this person is working in conjunction with another person that has a lot of experience. And while you're giving me some work, for what I am building you up. You are seeing how the engineer or the architect is working. Slowly but surely, your salary will increase, your value to me will increase, and it becomes a win-win situation. Entry-level positions with advancement. This is similar to internships, but sometimes you'll take a job that you know that okay, this is way too entry-level for me, but the potential for advancement within taking that job is the upside is so big that it's worth it for you to actually invest your time, even if it's less money, even if it's an entry-level position. It's worth it for you to invest that time because of the potential. So again, as you're looking at some of these jobs that you're seeing on the board or interviewing with people, ask about the potential for advancement. Because if someone tells you, you know what, I have a help desk job here, but we might be acquiring another company in the next 6 months, and that's probably going to open up an administrator position. Well, that's good information for you to have to make your decision. I can either go to this company that's this big and it might make an acquisition, and I have an opportunity to become an administrator or an engineer and start building that data center, or I can go here where maybe I'm at an administrator level, but there's no advancement at all. So keep that in mind as you're looking at some of these opportunities that you're going to come across. Contacts. A lot of us, myself included, would shy away from asking for help. Like I would, think it was, I don't want to ask anyone for help. I'm just going to go do this myself. I'm going to use the internet. I'm going to use a recruiter. I'm just not going to, I don't want to ask anyone for anything. I'm just going to do it myself. Well, there's nothing wrong with asking, because today you might be asking for something. Personally, they might be asking you for something for their kid, for their sister, for their cousin. Life's all about give and take. So don't be proud to the point where you're not leveraging your contacts. There's nothing wrong with it. I would leverage my contacts, and I'm going to get to contracts in a second, because that was a typo, but it's a good typo here for me. So leverage your contacts as much as possible. Now, as far as contracts are concerned, I told you in the beginning that the way I started to find work after I got that break was through contract. The way I found Citrix was through a 3-week contract. So sometimes you're going to get the ability to work on certain things for short periods of time. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months, 6 months. Sometimes it'll be out of state or out of town or out of country. If you're in Europe, maybe it'll be a neighboring country. Sometimes those contracts can also lead to big things. And they can lead to big things in a different geography, or they can lead to big things back at home. So if you've taken a contract in a different state, for a company that has a lot of branches, or maybe for a large company that might have contacts in your state, well, then a referral will be in order if you do a good job. So if you're not finding something steady, go for the contracts. There's a lot of companies that would prefer to bring someone in for a short period of time to either help because they're understaffed and they can't afford a full-time position, but they can afford a 3-week, 4-week, 2 months contract maybe. Take those. All of those lead to relevant experience. All of those lead to getting you one step further, one step closer to your dream job. Social networking. Social networking is interesting because it's something that's recently come into our way of life, at least. So in the past, your contacts were limited to people you interacted with on a daily basis. It was a smaller circle of people, or people you knew via email. Today, with social networking, your circle is huge. Your circle has expanded. So if you're not using LinkedIn, for instance, I would highly recommend that you use LinkedIn. And I would use LinkedIn appropriately. So find out, read the etiquette, how to use it so you're not abusing it. But the idea with LinkedIn is sometimes you might be connected to someone who knows someone else that could help you. There's no shame. There's no, don't put it on yourself, hey, I'm not going to ask. Again, I want to stress that. But you can always go to someone if they're connected to a hiring manager, or if they're connected to maybe they're a manager at a company that you'd like to work with, or that you saw a job opening, and say, hey, can you put in a good word for me, or maybe can you help me? There's nothing wrong with that. I've done it. I've used my networking circle in the past to see if I can find a contract or a full-time job. I highly recommend that you do the same. User groups. User groups are also something that they've always existed, but they've become more active. Whether it's the VMware user group, it's the Citrix user group, there's a Microsoft user group, and then there's a bunch of independent user groups that just come up that are not associated with any particular vendor. User groups are very important because, again, At user groups, you're going to make connections, you're going to network with people, and something eventually is going to spark, is going to come out of it. You're either going to get a full-time job, you're going to get contract work, you're going to get relevant experience, maybe through, hey, I'm willing to help you on this, this weekend you're doing a data center move, and instead of paying someone, I'm going to come help you with this. I'm not doing anything, but I'm going to come help you with it because that will benefit you. You're going to see how they're tearing down the rack, how they're packing it, how they're moving it, how they're reconnecting it on the other end. All of that is important because now you can put a lot of those keywords on your resume. So user groups are very important. And sometimes what you want to do is there are networking groups that are not related to technology, where people just go out maybe for a beer or for tea or for a drink or whatever it is, just to network. That also increases your circle of influence, your circle of people that you know, and it increases your visibility and your chances and likelihood of gaining or finding a job or contract work. My last slide before we take some questions is, at some point, it's gonna work out for you. First of all, what I want you to do is always be positive. Always. No matter how difficult it becomes, you're always positive. Positive energy is going to attract a dream job. Something will happen if you persist, and if you will it to happen, it will. I know sometimes it sounds like poetry, but I've gone through this, so I'm not talking to you without having done this before. There's no point in being, for lack of better terms, and I'm not saying that you are, but down or depressed or anything about this. You're not going to get anything out of it. If you stay positive, you're going to will it. It's going to happen. Now, once you get there, and this is important, once you get there and you're starting to become confident at your job, you're becoming comfortable with your skill sets and you're becoming good at it. And here's the dangerous part. When you get to that point, when you know yourself that you're good at something, that's when you're going to start to cross the line between confidence and arrogance. Make sure you're always very confident, but you're never arrogant. People don't like arrogant people. You're going to rub them the wrong way. They're not going to respect you. Stay confident. Stay away from arrogant. Positive attitude will always go a long way. And when I say with positive attitude, whether you're hunting for a job or after you've found that dream job of yours and you're working every day, sometimes you're going to come across people that don't know as much as you, where be patient. The last point is going to be very important. You have to be patient, and you have to have a positive attitude with them and try to help them as much as possible. Obviously, it gets to a point where if they're not getting it, then it is what it is. But keep that positive attitude. Sometimes you're going to get a difficult boss, a difficult manager, and I've had my fair share of those, where it's just very difficult to work with them. So again, and sometimes it'll be very difficult to work with them because you know more than them. And at that point, you'll have that opportunity of remaining confident or kind of rubbing it in their face, right, and being arrogant, and that's where problems will start. So stay positive. Try to outlast or outlive the problems. They will eventually work themselves out. And what I want to close with before I take questions is, once you find that dream job, once you're on the right track, once you are starting to grow, and once you start to figure out, well, what is my next thing? What am I going to do next to stay competitive, to stay different, to stay ahead? It might be writing, it might be teaching, it might be a whole slew of things. You might be the leader of a local user group, but you need to then give back. So the same way, industry, don't look at the person coming up behind you as job security. Look at yourself as figuring a way for you to stay competitive and to stay ahead of the game, and that's the only job security you'll see. So definitely try to mentor someone. I think you'll find the experience very fulfilling, and you'll actually enjoy doing that if you can bring someone up and actually teach them something that they didn't know.